Well, good evening, friends, and welcome back for another episode of Bedtime Stories with Peachy. Tonight's story is another one out of the book by Oscar Wilde, his collection of short stories. And this one is called The Star Child, dedicated to Miss Margot Tennant. And let's just get right into it. Once upon a time, two poor woodcutters were making their way home through a great pine forest. It was winter and a night of bitter cold. The snow lay thick upon the ground and upon the branches of the trees. The frost kept snapping the little twigs on either side of them as they passed, and when they came to the mountain torrent, she was hanging motionless in air, for the Ice King had kissed her. So cold was it that even the animals and the birds did not know what to make of it. Ugh, snarled the wolf as he limped through the brushwood with his tail between his legs. This is perfectly monstrous weather. Why doesn't the government look to it? Weet, 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 twittered the little linnets. The old earth is dead, and they have laid her out in her white shroud. The earth is going to be married, and this is her bridal dress, whispered the turtle doves to each other. Their little pink feet were quite frostbitten, but they felt that it was their duty to make a romantic view of the situation. Nonsense, growled the wolf. I tell you that it is all the fault of the government, and if you don't believe me, I shall eat you. The wolf had a thoroughly practical mind and was never at a loss for a good argument. Well, for my own part, said the woodpecker, who was a born philosopher, I don't care an atomic theory for explanations. If a thing is so, it is so, and at present it is terribly cold. Terribly cold it certainly was. The little squirrels who lived inside the tall fir tree kept rubbing each other's noses to keep themselves warm, and the rabbits curled themselves up in their holes and did not venture even to look out of doors. The only people who seemed to enjoy it were the great horned owls. Their feathers were quite stiff with rime, but they did not mind, and they rolled their large yellow eyes and called out to each other across the forest. To-it, to-hoo, to-it, to-hoo. What delightful weather we are having. On and on went the two woodcutters, blowing lustily upon their fingers and stamping with their huge iron-shod boots upon the caked snow. Once they sank into a deep drift, and they came out as white as millers are when their stones are grinding. And once they slipped on the hard, smooth ice where the marsh water was frozen, and their faggots fell out of their bundles, and they had to pick them up and bind them together again. And once they thought they had lost their way, and a great terror seized on them, for they knew that the snow is cruel to those who sleep in her arms. But they put their trust in the good Saint Martin, who watches over all travelers, and retraced their steps, and went warily, and at last they reached the outskirts of the forest, and saw, far down in the valley beneath them, the lights of the village in which they dwelt. So overjoyed were they at their deliverance that they laughed aloud, and the earth seemed to them like a flower of silver, and the moon like a flower of gold. Yet after that they had laughed, they became sad, for they remembered their poverty. And one of them said to the other, Why did we make merry, seeing that life is for the rich, and not for such as we are? Better that we had died of cold in the forest, or that some wild beast had fallen upon us and slain us. Truly, answered his companion, much is given to some, and little is given to others. Injustice has parceled out the world, nor is there equal division of aught save of sorrow. But as they were bewailing their misery to each other, this strange thing happened. But as they were bewailing their misery to each other, this strange thing happened. There fell from the heaven a bright and beautiful star. It slipped down the side of the sky, passing by the other stars in its course, and as they watched it wondering, it seemed to them to sink behind a clump of willow trees that stood hard by a little sheepfold no more than a stone's throw away. Why, there is a crock of gold for whoever finds it, they cried, and they set to and ran. So eager were they for the gold. And one of them ran faster than his mate, and outstripped him, and forced his way through the willows, and came out on the other side. And lo, there was indeed a thing of gold lying on the white snow. So he hastened towards it, and stooping down, placed his hands upon it. And it was a cloak of golden tissue, curiously wrought with stars, and wrapped in many folds. And he cried out to his comrade that he had found the treasure that had fallen from the sky. And when his comrade had come up, they sat them down in the snow, and loosened the folds of the cloak that they might divide the pieces of gold. Excuse me. But alas, no gold was in it, nor silver, nor indeed treasure of any kind, but only a little child who was asleep. And one of them said to the other, This is a bitter ending to our hope, nor have we any good fortune. For what doth a child profit to a man? Let us leave it here and go our way, seeing that we are poor men and have children of our own whose bread we may not give to another. But his companion answered him, Nay, but it were an evil thing to leave a child to perish here in the snow. And though I am as poor as thou, and though I am as poor as thou art, and have many mouths to feed, and am but little in the pot, yet will I bring it home with me, and my wife shall have care of it. So very tenderly he took up the child, and wrapped the cloak around it to shield it from the harsh cold, and made his way down the hill to the village. His comrade marveling much at his foolishness and softness of heart. And when they came to the village, his comrade said to him, Thou hast the child, therefore give me the cloak, and for it is meet that we should share. But he answered him, Nay, for the cloak is neither mine nor thine, but the child's only. And he bade him Godspeed, and went to his own house and knocked. And when his wife opened the door and saw that her husband had returned safe to her, she put her arms around his neck and kissed him, and took from his back the bundle of faggots, and brushed the snow off his boots, and bade him come in. But he said to her, I have found something in the forest, and I have brought it here to thee to have care of it. And he stirred not from the threshold. What is it? She cried. Show it to me, for the house is bare, and we have need of many things. And he drew the cloak back and showed her the sleeping child. "Alack, good man," she murmured, "have we not children enough of our own, that thou must needs bring a changeling to sit by the hearth? And who knows if it will not bring us bad fortune? And how shall we tend it?" And she was wroth against him. "Nay, but it is a star child," he answered, and he told her the strange manner of the finding of it. But she would not be appeased, but mocked at him and spoke angrily and cried, "Our children lack bread, and shall we feed the children of another? Who is there who careth for us? And who giveth us food?" "Nay, but God careth for the sparrows even, and feedeth them," he answered. "Do not the sparrows die of hunger in the winter?" she asked. "And is it not winter now?" And the man answered nothing, but stirred not from the threshold. And a bitter wind from the forest came in through the open door and made her tremble. And she shivered and said to him, "Wilt thou not close the door? There cometh a bitter wind into my house, and I am cold." "Into a house where a heart is hard, cometh there not always a bitter wind?" he asked. And the woman answered him nothing, but crept closer to the fire. And after a time she turned round and looked at him, and her eyes were full of tears. And he came in swiftly and placed the child in her arms, and she kissed it, and laid it in the little bed where the youngest of their own children was lying. And on the morrow the woodcutter took the curious cloak and placed it in the great chest, and a chain of amber that was around the child's neck his wife took and set it in the chest also. So the star child was brought up with the children of the woodcutter, and sat at the same board with them, and was their playmate. And every year he became more beautiful to look at, so that all those who dwelt in the village were filled with wonder. For while they were swarthy and black-haired, he was white and delicate as sawn ivory, and his curls were like ringlets of the daffodil. His lips also were like the petals of a red flower, and his eyes were like violets by a river of pure water, and his body like the narcissus of field where the mower comes not. Yet did his beauty work him evil, for he grew proud and cruel and selfish. The children of the woodcutter and the other children of the village he despised, saying that they were of mean parentage, while he was noble, being sprung from a star. And he made himself master over them, and called them his servants. No pity had he for the poor, or for those who were blind or maimed or in any way afflicted, but would cast stones at them and drive them forth onto the highway, and bid them beg their bread elsewhere, so that none save the outlaws came twice to that village to ask for alms. Indeed, he was as one enamored of beauty, and would mock at the weakly and ill-favored, and would make jest of them. And himself he loved. And in summer, when the winds were still, he would lie by the well in the priest's orchard, and look down at the marvel of his own face, and laugh for the pleasure he had in his own fairness. Often did the woodcutter and his wife chide him, and say, "We did not deal with thee as thou dealst with those who are left desolate, and have none to succor them. Wherefore art thou so cruel to all who need pity? Often did the old priest send for him, and seek to teach him the love of living things, saying to him, the fly is thy brother, do it no harm. The wild birds that roam through the forest have their freedom. Snare them not for thy pleasure. God made the blind worm and the mole, and each has its place. Who art thou to bring pain into God's world? Even the cattle of the field praise him. But the star child heeded not their words, but would frown and flout, and go back to his companions and lead them. And his companions followed him, for he was fair and fleet of foot, and could dance and pipe and make music. And wherever the star child led them, they followed. And whatever the star child bade them do, they did they. And when he pierced with a sharp reed the dim eyes of the mole, they laughed. And when he cast stones at the leper, they laughed also. And in all things he ruled them, and they became hard of heart, even as he was. Now there passed one day through the village a poor beggar woman. Her garments were torn and ragged, and her feet were bleeding from the rough road on which she had traveled. And she was in very evil plight. And being weary, she sat her down under a chestnut tree to rest. But when the star child saw her, he said to his companions, see, there sitteth a foul beggar woman under that fair and green-leaved tree. Come, let us drive her hence, for she is ugly and ill-favored. So he came near and threw stones at her and mocked her. And she looked at him with terror in her eyes, nor did she move her gaze from him. And when the woodcutter, who was cleaving logs in a haggard hard by, saw what the star child was doing, he ran up and rebuked him, and said to him, surely thou art hard of heart, and knowest not mercy. For what evil has this poor woman done to thee, that thou should treat her in this wise? And the star child grew red with anger, and stamped his foot upon the ground, and said, who art thou to question me what I do? I am no son of thine to do thy bidding. Thou speakest truly, answered the woodcutter, yet did I show thee pity when I found thee in the forest? And when the woman heard these words, she gave out a loud cry and fell into a swoon. And the woodcutter carried her to his own house, and his wife had care of her. And when she rose up from the swoon, into which she had fallen, they set meat and drink before her, and bade her have comfort. But she would neither eat nor drink, but said to the woodcutter, didst thou not say that the child was found in the forest? And was it not 10 years from this day? And the woodcutter answered, yea, it was in the forest that I found him, and it is 10 years from this day. And what signs didst thou find with him? She cried. Bare he not upon his neck a chain of amber? Was not round him a cloak of gold tissue broidered with stars? Truly, answered the woodcutter, it was even as thou sayest. And he took the cloak and the amber chain from the chest where they lay, and showed them to her. And when she saw them, she wept for joy, and said, he is my little son whom I lost in the forest. I pray thee send for him quickly, for in search of him have I wandered over the whole world. So the woodcutter and his wife went out and called to the Star-Child and said to him, Go into the house, and there shall find thy mother, who is waiting for thee. And so he ran in, filled with wonder and great gladness. But when he saw her who was waiting there, he laughed scornfully and said, Why, where is my mother? For I see none here but this vile beggar woman. And the woman answered him, I am thy mother. Thou art mad to say so, he cried the Star-Child angrily. I am no son of thine, for thou art a beggar and ugly and in rags. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thy foul face no more. Nay, but thou art indeed my little son, whom I bare in the forest, she cried, and she fell on her knees, and held out her arms to him. The robbers stole thee from me, and left thee to die, she murmured. But I recognized thee when I saw thee, and the signs also have I recognized, the cloak of gold tissue and the amber chain. Therefore I pray thee come with me, for over the whole world I have wandered in search of thee. Come with me, my son, for I have need of thy love. But the Star-Child stirred not from his place, but shut the doors of his heart against her. Nor was there any sound heard save the sound of the woman weeping from pain. And at last he spoke to her, and his voice was hard and bitter. If in very truth thou art my mother, he said, it had been better hadst thou stayed away, and not come here to bring me to shame, seeing that I thought I was the child of some star, and not a beggar's child, as thou tellest me that I am. Therefore get thee hence, and let me see thee no more. Alas, my son, she cried, wilt thou not kiss me before I go? For I have suffered much to find thee. Nay, said the Star-Child, but thou art too foul to look at, and rather would I kiss the adder or the toad than thee. So the woman rose up and went away into the forest, weeping bitterly. And when the Star-Child saw that she had gone, he was glad, and ran back to his playmates that he might play with them. But when they beheld him coming, they mocked him and said, Why, thou art as foul as the toad, and as loathsome as the adder. Get thee hence, for we will not suffer thee to play with us. And they drave him out of the garden. And the Star-Child frowned and said to himself, What is this that they say to me? I will go to the well of water and look into it, and it shall tell me of my beauty. So he went to the well of water and looked into it, and lo, his face was as the face of a toad, and his body was scaled like an adder. And he flung himself down on the grass and wept, and said to himself, Surely this has come upon me by reason of my sin, for I have denied my mother, and have driven her away, and been proud and cruel to her. Wherefore I will go and seek her through the whole world, nor will I rest till I have found her. And there came to him the little daughter of the woodcutter, and she put her hand upon his shoulder and said, What doth it matter if thou had lost thy comeliness? Stay with us, and I will not mock at thee. And he said to her, Nay, but I have been cruel to my mother, and as a punishment has this evil been sent to me. Wherefore I must go hence, and wander through the world till I find her. and she give me her forgiveness. So he ran away into the forest and called out to his mother to come to him. But there was no answer. All day long he called to her, and when the sun set he lay down to sleep on a bed of leaves. And the birds and the animals fled from him, for they remembered his cruelty. And he was alone, save for the toad that watched him, and the slow adder that crawled past. And in the morning he rose up, and plucked some bitter berries from the trees and ate them, and took his way through the great forest, weeping sorely. And of everything that he met he made inquiry if perchance they had seen his mother. He said to the mole, "Thou canst go beneath the earth. Tell me, is my mother there?" And the mole answered, "Thou hast blinded my eyes. How should I know?" And he said to the linnet, "Thou canst fly over the tops of the tall trees, and canst see the whole world. Tell me, canst thou see my mother?" And the linnet answered, "Thou hast clipped my wings for thy pleasure. How should I fly?" And to the little squirrel who lived in the fir tree and was lonely, he said, "Where is my mother?" And the squirrel answered, "Thou hast slain mine. Dost thou seek to slay thine own? Thine also?" And the squirrel answered, "Thou hast slain mine. Dost thou seek to slay thine also?" And the star child wept and bowed his head and prayed forgiveness, and went on through the forest, seeking for the beggar woman. And on the third day he came to the other side of the forest, and went down into the plain. And when he passed through the villages, the children mocked him, and threw stones at him. And the Carlots would not suffer him even to sleep in the burns, lest he might bring mildew on the stored corn. So foul was he to look at. And their hired men drave him away, and there was none who had pity on him. Nor could he hear anywhere of the beggar woman, who was his mother, though for the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and often seemed to see her on the road in front of him, and would call to her, and run after her, till the sharp flints made his feet to bleed. But overtake her he could not. And those who dwelt by the way did ever deny that they had seen her, or any like her, and that they made sport of his sorrow. For the space of 3 years he wandered over the world, and in the world there was neither love, nor loving kindness, nor charity for him. But it was even such a world as he had made for himself in the days of his great pride. I'm thinking we might need to finish this another night. It's so long. It's really good though. But this seems like a good place to stop, and yeah, about the halfway point. So thank you so much for joining me for the first part of The Star Child. I really look forward to finishing this for you soon. I think I'll try and do that as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow, so we don't have to wait too long, because I'm excited about it too. All right, my friends. Good night. Sleep tight.